I took the night security job on the Riverboat because after losing the hotel, I needed money fast and a place where nobody cared what my name used to mean. Before that, I had been a security supervisor in Biloxi. Then, a guest incident went bad. A manager leaned on me to help smooth out the report, and I let myself believe the polished version would protect everybody involved. It protected exactly one group, and it was not mine. When the surveillance footage came up later, management cleaned house in the neatest way possible. I lost the job, most of my professional reputation, and the last weak piece of normal life I still had at home. The casino in Louisiana sat on the river under warm lights and wet night air. All blinking machines, mirrored walls, heavy carpet, and quiet security cameras tucked into every corner that mattered. It looked polished enough from the gaming floor, but the farther back you went, the more the place started smelling like old wood, damp metal, and something the renovation had not covered. On my first night, they told me there was a lower deck nobody used anymore. Then they told me what to do if I heard music coming from down there after 1 a.m. The boat sat tied up along a dark stretch of Louisiana River, bright enough from a distance to look almost cheerful. Warm casino light spilled across the water. Brass trim caught reflections from the signs. Music leaked out every time the main doors opened for a guest. Up close, though, the place had another smell under all that polish. Old wood, river damp, floor cleaner, stale smoke that had sunk too deep to ever leave for good. Valet took cars at the front. Guests moved in and out under the covered entry with drinks in plastic cups and the tired, hopeful look gamblers get after midnight. I parked in the employee lot, sat there a second with both hands on the wheel, and watched the security staff at the entrance check bags and nod people through. From the parking side, the Riverboat looked less like a casino and more like a building pretending not to be afloat. Inside, the gaming floor was all carpet, slot noise, soft overhead music, and the constant low current of people trying to look more in control than they felt. Security office sat off a back corridor behind the cashier cage and the surveillance room. That was where I met the shift supervisor, a broad-shouldered woman named Denise Landry, who wore a dark blazer over her vest and looked like somebody who had spent enough years in casino security to stop reacting to anything too early. She checked my badge, looked over the paperwork from HR, and asked if I knew how to write a clean incident note. I told her yes. She said that could be either useful or dangerous, depending on the night. Then she handed me a radio, a small floor map, and a ring with 2 access keys on it. Her tone stayed practical, but I had the clear feeling she already knew enough about my last job not to be impressed by calm answers. She walked me through the floor fast. Main gaming area first, then the lounge, then the narrower service corridors behind the restaurants and the players' club desk. The Riverboat had been updated over the years, and you could feel the layers of it. New carpeting over old bones, fresh paint over older walls that still held a damp river smell in the seams. Cameras sat in black domes over almost every angle that mattered. Denise pointed out the cashier cage, the elevator to the upper offices, the locked access to surveillance, the employee stairwell, and the lower deck door at the far end of a quieter hall behind the old poker room. The lower deck was closed, she said. Not storage, not guest access, just closed. She said it in a tone that made the word sound like a category, not an explanation. From somewhere out on the floor, a cluster of slot machines hit a bonus run all at once and filled the hallway with bright fake celebration. Back in the office, she gave me the unofficial rules. Folded paper, no header, no logo, no signature, just short typed lines that looked like they had been copied enough times to stop belonging to anyone. The first rule said if I heard live music below the closed lower deck after 1 a.m., I was not to go down alone. Call it in, wait 2 minutes, and listen for a second song. If there was no second song, leave it alone. The second said if a guest asked for the cashier, but their player card printed blank, I was not to escort them to the cage. Walk them back to the main floor, and wait for them to choose a direction on their own. The third said, if an elderly man in a gray suit asked what year it was, I was not to answer until he spoke again. I read that one twice before I looked up. Denise did not smile. She only told me that every rule on the page had cost someone more than a conversation. There were 2 more rules at the bottom. Never compare the lower deck camera feed to the deck in person while standing on the stairs. Check one, then the other. Never both at once. And if a guest appeared on camera, but never on the entry log, I was not to remove them from the floor myself. Call for a second guard, and keep them in sight until they left the frame. I asked Denise whether these were old casino stories, the kind staff pass around so night shift has something to whisper about in empty corridors. She said casinos already had enough real trouble without needing ghost stories for entertainment. Then she asked if I wanted the useful version or the comforting version. I told her useful. She nodded once and said the useful version was that the boat ran smoother if the rules were followed, and rougher if they were not. That answer bothered me because it sounded too much like something I would have said once to make a bad policy feel manageable. The first part of the shift stayed ordinary enough to make the rules feel embarrassing in my pocket. 2 intoxicated guests arguing over chips at a blackjack table. A man asleep in a lounge chair outside the restroom hall. A woman at the Players Club desk who insisted her card balance was wrong until a host showed her the printout and she decided she was angry at the machine, not the staff. Normal casino security work is mostly about being visible, calm, and mildly inconvenient at the right time. I knew that world already. Walk a floor, read hands, watch faces, be polite until politeness stops doing the job. For a while, I started to think the Riverboat might just be another polished place where staff had built little night rituals out of boredom and humidity. Then at 1:12 a.m., while I was standing near the lower hallway checking a service door, I heard a slow stretch of live trumpet music rise up from below the closed deck. It was not loud. That was what made it wrong. Not piped through ceiling speakers or leaking from the lounge. This sounded lower and softer, like a real band farther away than it should have been. The kind of slow, late-night tune meant for a room already half given over to smoke and old money. I stood still and listened hard enough to make sure it was not drifting in from the main floor somehow. Denise had been clear. Call it in, wait 2 minutes, and listen for a second song. So I keyed the radio and told her I had music under the lower deck door. She said, copy and stay put. The lower hall itself stayed empty, warm from the AC, but carrying that damp, older smell under the fresh air. I checked my watch and waited. The trumpet line ended. Then there was nothing. No applause, no chair movement, no second song. When the 2 minutes passed, Denise told me to leave it alone and come back to the office. I did. and I did not like how relieved I felt to obey. Denise asked only one question when I got back. Was it live or recorded? I told her live, or close enough that I would not have argued the difference in a report. She nodded, like that answer fit a pattern she already knew, and told me to log the time on a yellow pad kept separate from the normal incident notebook. That got my attention more than the music had. Separate paperwork means separate consequences. I wrote 1:12 a.m., lower deck hall, live music, no second song. Then I asked how often that happened. Denise said often enough that they did not like to discuss it in front of new staff until the new staff had heard it themselves. Before I could ask anything else, one of the floor guards called in for help at the far baccarat side with a guest dispute. I went because normal work was still normal work, and for the next 20 minutes the boat gave me exactly what I had hoped for when I took the job. People problems, money arguments, a situation that stayed inside the living world. At 1:46 a.m., I was back in the office with Denise, reviewing the last incident note, when one of the surveillance monitors in the corner caught my eye. It was the lower deck camera feed, black and white, fixed wide on what looked like an old gaming room with covered tables and chairs stacked along the wall. The lower deck was supposed to be dark and unused. On the screen it was lit softly enough to show 4 figures seated at 2 old blackjack tables, all of them still as if waiting for a dealer. I stood up before I knew I was moving. Denise looked at the screen, then at me, and said, "Do not go to the stairs." The camera showed the figures clearly enough to be human, but not enough to identify. One of them lifted an arm like he was signaling for service. Then the feed flickered once and went back to an empty dark room with dust-covered tables, and no one there at all. Denise wrote the time down before I did. That was when I understood the rules had not been written for atmosphere. I did not sleep well after that first night. That was not because I thought I had seen a ghost on a monitor. It was because the whole thing had fit too neatly into procedure. Music below, wait 2 minutes, no second song, log the time. Camera shows seated guests on a closed deck. Do not go to the stairs. Write it down. That was what bothered me. A place only gets rules that specific when enough people have already made the wrong choice the same way. By the time I came back the next night, the river air felt heavier, and the boat looked a little less polished from the parking lot than it had before. Same warm lights, same black water, same valet lane. Only now I knew there was a closed deck below the main floor with its own paperwork. Denise had another yellow pad ready on the desk when I checked in. She did not mention the camera figures. She only asked if I had heard any music in my apartment after sunrise. When I said no, she nodded like that was useful. The shift started with normal trouble again, which I was beginning to understand was its own kind of strategy. A loud table loss at blackjack, a cocktail waitress asking security to walk her to the back stairs after a guest got too familiar, a chip dispute at roulette that ended the second surveillance, confirmed the payout had been right. Casinos burn through small human dramas all night, and most of them vanish the moment someone with a badge and a radio steps into frame. I walked the floor, checked the side halls, watched the players' club line, and tried not to keep glancing toward the lower deck corridor every time the music from the lounge shifted keys. Around 12:38 a.m., a man in a cream sport coat asked me where the cashier cage was. Nothing strange there. But when I walked him over to the kiosk near the Players Club so he could print his player card summary, the machine spat out a blank white strip with only the casino logo at the top. He looked at the blank strip in his hand like it did not surprise him. That mattered. Normal guests get annoyed, embarrassed, or confused when a machine fails them. This man, late 60s maybe, clean nails, polished shoes, watery blue eyes, only glanced at the paper once, and then asked if I would take him to the cashier. Rule 2 came back at once. If a guest asks for the cashier, but their player card prints blank, do not escort them to the cage. Walk them back to the main floor and wait for them to choose a direction on their own. I told him the machine was acting up and that I would walk him back toward the floor first. He smiled in a small, patient way that reminded me of men in hotels who think they can get special treatment just by sounding older and softer than everyone else. I took him back toward the central gaming floor, then stopped beside a bank of slots and waited. He stood there 1 second, 2, then turned left without another word and disappeared into a crowd thin enough that I should have been able to keep him in sight. I followed the direction he had taken and found nothing. No cream coat near the slots, no polished shoes at the lounge rail, no man waiting by the cashier cage pretending he had gone there on his own. I checked the nearest camera angle from the service monitor in a host station and saw him crossing the main floor exactly where I had lost him. Then, 2 seconds later, the next camera showed only open carpet and 3 gamblers I could account for. No cream coat, no turn toward the restrooms, no elevator, just absence. That was the first time I felt the boat use the part of my brain that used to get me in trouble at the hotel. The part that hates loose ends and wants to tidy them up before anyone else notices. I nearly radioed his description right then. Then I remembered the rule about guests who appear on camera, but never on the entry log. Do not remove them yourself. Call for a second guard, and keep them in sight until they leave the frame. I had already lost the second part. Back in the office, Denise checked the guest entry log for the last 2 hours, while I pulled the player card kiosk record. No blank print events on that terminal. No guest in a cream coat on the entry cameras. No Players Club account linked to the machine in that moment. That should have made me feel vindicated. Instead, it just made the whole interaction harder to place inside normal security language. Denise wrote the time on the yellow pad and asked one detail that surprised me. She asked if the blank strip had been warm when I took it from the machine. I told her I had not noticed. She said next time I should. I asked why. She said the ones that came from the lower deck side of things tended to feel warm, like fresh receipts, even when the printer had not run. Before I could ask what exactly that meant, the radio cracked once, and one of the floor guards said he had an older gentleman in a gray suit asking for directions near the old poker corridor. The gray suit was the first rule on that page that had felt too specific to be useful. Now, there he was, standing under a wall sconce in the old carpeted hall behind the poker room, like he had been there all night, waiting for me to finish doubting him. He was thin, well-dressed, silver hair combed back, tie neat, shoes dark and clean enough to look out of place on a casino floor after midnight. He did not look confused in the ordinary elderly guest way. He looked patient, like a man at a station platform who has already been told the train is late and is deciding how much disappointment to show. When I approached, he turned his head toward me and asked what year it was. Rule 3 hit so hard I could almost hear the paper. Do not answer until he speaks again. If he asks twice, step back before you say anything. So I said nothing. The old man held my eyes for maybe 3 seconds, then asked the question again in the exact same tone. I stepped back once before opening my mouth. I told him the year and watched his face for whatever came next. He nodded as if I had confirmed something private rather than useful, then asked whether the lower tables were still open. I told him there were no guest areas below that level. He smiled slightly, not because he thought I was lying, but because he seemed to recognize the kind of answer. Then he turned and walked toward the main floor without another word. I followed him to the corridor mouth and lost him in less time than it should have taken an older man to cross open carpet. I did not chase him. That was new for me and took effort. Instead, I radioed Denise and gave the description. She asked whether he had asked about the year once or twice. When I told her twice, she said to write it down and not go near the lower stairs for at least 15 minutes. I asked what difference the second question made. She said the second question was usually when men started sounding too helpful. I spent those 15 minutes on normal floor work and tried not to let the old man's voice keep replaying in my head. That was harder than it should have been, because the boat knew exactly how to make polite questions feel loaded. In hotels and casinos, most bad nights begin with something that sounds easy to handle. A guest asking for a room key, a drunk wanting directions, a manager asking for a cleaner report than the cameras deserve. Trouble almost never opens by announcing itself honestly. Around 1:19 a.m., I was checking the side hall by the closed poker pit when the music came again from below the lower deck. Same live sound as the night before, trumpet first, then a low piano under it, like a lounge set warming up for a room I was not supposed to know existed. I called it in, stayed where I was, and listened. This time, the first song ended, and a second one began 30 seconds later. That changed the rule from an eerie note in my pocket to a live decision. Call it in, wait 2 minutes, listen for a second song. If there is no second song, leave it alone. This time, there was one. Denise came to the hallway herself with another guard named Reggie and told me to stay off the stairs while she checked the lower deck feed from the office. Reggie stood by the stairwell door and looked less nervous than tired, which on a night shift is often the more trustworthy reaction. Denise called over the radio that the lower deck camera was showing empty tables and no movement. Then, while I was looking at the closed door in front of me, the music rose a little louder from below, and I heard something else under it. Chairs moving. Not many, just enough wooden scrape to suggest a room getting occupied. Reggie did not look at me when he said the next part. He said, "Never trust the feed from the stairs." Back in the office, Denise had the lower deck camera up on one screen and the stairwell hall on another. The lower deck feed showed darkness, covered tables, no guests. The stairwell hall showed the three of us returning from the corridor. That should have been the end of it for the moment. Then one frame on the lower deck screen changed. Not the whole image, just the nearest table. A stack of chips appeared on the felt where there had been none. Red, white, green, neat short stacks like someone had bought in and stepped away. The next frame showed a hand resting beside them. Pale hand, dark suit sleeve, no body in view. Then the screen snapped back to the same empty room as before. Denise shut that monitor off at once instead of replaying it. I asked why. She said because the lower deck got easier to enter the more staff tried to make the picture hold still. That was the moment I understood the boat had two ways of lying, through guests and through the tools we used to verify guests. The next night, I came in already listening for music before I hit the employee door, which is never a good sign in a place like that. Once a building teaches you where to expect the wrong thing, part of your mind starts waiting there ahead of itself. The river was black beyond the valet lane. Humidity sat on the railings and the window glass. Inside, the floor looked like any other casino, after dark, half tired, half hopeful. People feeding bills into machines like the next pull might explain the rest of their lives. Denise checked me in, handed me the yellow pad from the night before, and asked if I had replayed the lower deck hand in my head after going home. I told her yes. She said that was normal for the first few nights, and bad if it kept feeling useful by the fifth. Then she sent me out with Reggie for a wider floor walk than usual, one of those shifts where management wants more visible security without fully admitting why. Reggie was the kind of guard every casino has at least one of. Tall, quiet, hard to hurry, not because he was lazy, but because he had already learned that fast decisions usually belonged to guests and managers, not to the people who had to clean up after them. We made the usual loop first: slot banks, lounge corridor, poker side hall, cashier line, then the quieter carpeted stretch near the old lower deck door. The boat sounded normal until it did not. Slot chimes, soft overhead jazz, chips on felt, somebody laughing too loud at blackjack, somebody else losing badly in total silence. Then, right as we reached the lower hallway, all of that seemed to step back a half pace, and I heard a chair slide across wood from below, not on the floor above us, not from the poker room behind, from under the closed deck, clean enough to feel measured. Reggie heard it too. He did not stop walking. He only said, "If you ever start hearing setup sounds instead of music, do not let the stairs become the next thing you want to understand." That line stayed with me because it was exactly the kind of thing I had once ignored at the hotel, where I lost everything. Not the supernatural part, the professional part, the moment when somebody older and more careful gives you a warning that sounds incomplete, and your pride fills in the rest with confidence. We finished the floor walk and came back through the surveillance office because Denise wanted a second guard present when we checked the lower deck feed. That in itself was unusual enough to matter. Surveillance rooms in places like that are built to feel more certain than the rest of the building. Cold air, dark wall, monitors everywhere, no smell of smoke or money or guests. Just camera truth. On the lower deck feed, the room was empty again at first. Covered tables, stacked chairs, closed service bar. Then the image refreshed one frame at a time and showed 3 occupied blackjack spots near the center of the room. No bodies moving in. They were simply there now, as if the scene had skipped to a later point. One player had a pale hand resting on the felt. Another sat with both arms crossed. The third was turned just enough that I could see only the side of a jacket sleeve and one shoulder. No dealer in frame, no chips movement, no conversation, at least not anything the feed gave us. Denise told surveillance not to zoom. That got my attention, because zoom is the most normal request in the world when you are looking at a possible unauthorized presence. The operator obeyed without argument, which meant he had heard some version of that instruction before. I asked Denise why zoom mattered. She said the lower deck behaved better when it had to stay wide. Then, on the monitor, one of the seated figures turned his head toward the camera in a way no guest should have been able to know mattered from that angle. Reggie muttered something under his breath and told me not to go near the stairwell until the image changed or disappeared. 30 seconds later, the feed went empty again. No flicker, no static, just a dark room with no one in it. That should have been enough to keep me off the lower stairs for the rest of the night. It nearly was. Then, around 12:58 a.m., I got pulled to the Players Club desk because a woman in a red jacket was insisting her card had money on it, and the kiosk kept printing blanks. She was not drunk. She was not loud. She looked more irritated than anything, the way practical people do when systems fail them in public. I watched the host try the card twice. Both times, the printer spat out a white strip with only the logo at the top. No balance, no player number, nothing. The woman turned to me and asked if I could just walk her to the cashier because she was tired of waiting on machines. Rule 2 was sitting there, ready for me by then. Do not escort them to the cage. Walk them back to the main floor and wait for them to choose a direction on their own. So I did exactly that. She followed me in silence, heels soft on the carpet, and when I stopped near the center slots, she asked if the boat still had tables below. I told her there were no guest areas below that level. She smiled in a way that was not quite friendly and not quite mocking, more like recognition from somebody who had expected the answer. Then she turned away from me and moved back into the floor. For maybe 10 seconds, I kept her in sight. Red jacket, dark hair, pale hand on the rail as she passed the slots. Then a couple in matching casino t-shirts crossed between us, and when they were gone, so was she. I did not chase. That took effort. Instead, I went straight to the nearest host station and checked the camera angle covering that exact section of floor. The red jacket showed on the feed, walking left to right. Then she passed the mirrored column by the bar and disappeared from the frame one step too early, before the camera edge could have lost her naturally. Denise saw that replay over my shoulder and shut the monitor down faster than she had the lower deck feed. She said the boat did better with polite women than with angry men, which was not a comforting thing to hear. At 1:06 a.m., the gray-suited man came back. I saw him before he saw me this time, standing by the rail outside the closed poker area, with both hands folded lightly in front of him, like he was waiting for a host to recognize him. He turned when I approached and asked what year it was. Same tone as before, calm enough to make the question sound almost social. I waited. He asked again. I stepped back before answering, exactly like the rules said. When I gave him the year, he nodded once and asked who signed the report. That was the first time the boat used plain language from my old life instead of only pressure. My stomach dropped in a way I had not felt since the hotel lawyers started reviewing the incident files. I asked him if he needed assistance. He smiled faintly and said that was what I had offered last time too. Then he looked past me toward the lower hallway and asked whether the young woman downstairs was still waiting. When I turned back, he was already walking away at a speed that did not fit his age. I radioed Denise and gave her the exchange word for word. She made me repeat only one part, who signed the report. Then she told me to write it on the yellow pad and keep the page separate from the guest incident notes. That was the second time I had seen the boat force a split in paperwork. One record for management reality, one for whatever the night staff was actually surviving. I wrote the line down and asked her if the gray-suited man always moved from the year question to something personal. She said usually by the third night with the same guard. Then she added that the lower deck had a habit of using the parts of your past you had already trained yourself to speak about in cleaner language. That was almost exactly what had ruined me at the hotel. Not the incident itself, though that was ugly enough. The ruin came from helping a bad thing fit into better wording until it no longer looked like the same night. At 1:21 a.m., the music started again below the closed deck, this time piano first, then trumpet, then what sounded like low talk under it. The murmur of a room not trying to be heard from upstairs. Denise sent me and Reggie to the hallway, but told us to stay off the stairs until surveillance checked the feed. We reached the lower corridor, just as the second song began. That meant the rule did not let us walk away this time. Reggie stood nearest the stairwell door, head slightly turned like he was listening through the wood instead of at it. The music sounded older than the lounge music upstairs, slower and less polished, the kind of set a river crowd might have sat through with cigarettes and weak bourbon 50 years ago. Denise came over the radio and said the lower deck feed was empty, not dark, empty. No guests, no dealer, no movement. Then, through the closed door in front of us, I heard the clean, dry clap of playing cards being spread across felt. Everything in me wanted to open that door right then, not because I thought I could fix anything down there, but because work like mine trains you to distrust contradiction unless you physically break it open. That instinct had cost me once already in another building under nicer lights. Reggie must have seen some version of that on my face, because he put one hand on the stair rail between us and said, "Do not make the room choose between the camera and you." I asked what that meant. He said the lower deck got worse when it had to decide which one of you was the real witness. Then the cards sounded again below, followed by a short burst of laughter and one sharp stack of chips landing on wood. Denise came over the radio a second later and told us the lower feed now showed a single guest seated near the back wall, red jacket, head turned toward the camera. The woman from the Players Club. Reggie told me to step away from the stairwell before I looked up at any screen. That was when I understood the lower deck was not just active, it was trying to synchronize what we saw. That word stuck with me all through the next hour. Synchronize. It sounded too technical for fear and too honest for folklore, which usually means it belongs to the useful part of a bad place. Denise had us off the lower hall after that and kept me on the main floor, where the work was noisy enough to stop my mind from trying to line the pieces up too quickly. A dice dispute at craps, a cocktail server wanting backup on a guest who kept grabbing her wrist, a man asleep in a lounge booth with 3 empty plastic cups and a stack of losing slips in his shirt pocket. Normal problems. Human problems. They should have helped. Instead, they only made the boat feel more deliberate. Every ordinary incident seemed to be happening on the polished surface, while something below kept trying to get the staff to agree on one version of what was real. Around 2:03 a.m., surveillance called down and said the red jacket woman was now on a camera near the old poker corridor upstairs. No one had seen her come up. I went to the host station nearest that corridor and checked the live feed without standing anywhere near the stairwell. Rule 4 had become one of the few things in the building I trusted more than my own need to verify. The red jacket woman was on camera for 3 seconds, standing beside the mirrored column with her head turned toward a section of carpet where no guest should have been interesting enough to hold her. Then the image skipped, not enough to call it a glitch to management, just enough to make movement feel less trustworthy. On the next frame, she was gone. In her place stood the gray-suited man, hands folded, looking toward the same empty patch of floor. Then he, too, was gone. Denise told me to shut that monitor down and come back to the office. I asked if surveillance was seeing the same thing. She said yes, but they were being careful not to let the feed become the only witness. That line bothered me because it meant the boat had already trained the staff to negotiate with the tools. Back in the office, Denise finally told me the part she had probably been holding because she did not yet know what kind of mistake I was most likely to make. Years ago, before the lower deck was closed, there had been a night involving a fight, a bad collapse, and a floor manager who pushed the staff to keep things looking normal long enough for the gaming room upstairs not to panic. No clean story survived it. Too many witnesses, too much money moving, too much interest in making the report polite. Some people said the trouble started with a guest who should have been escorted out earlier. Some said it started with a dealer. Some said the real damage came after, when too many employees agreed to smoother versions than the cameras deserved. Denise told it flat, no dramatics, but I felt every word of it land where my own old scandal still lived. That was when I understood why the boat had chosen me so quickly. It knew exactly what kind of man helps an institution keep its face. I asked if the lower deck was strongest with guards who had once signed off on bad nights they should have named more honestly. Denise said not always strongest, but easiest. She said each long-term night worker got his own version of pressure. For some, it was family. For some, it was debt. For some, it was old panic dressed up as duty. In my case, it was polished language, reports, courtesy, the reflex to make a problem manageable by making it smaller in words. That fit too well to argue with. I had told myself for months that what ruined me at the hotel was the footage. That was only half true. The footage only mattered because I had already helped build the cleaner version first. Around 2:21 a.m., one of the Players Club kiosks printed a blank strip without anyone touching it. When I went over, the paper was warm in my hand. On the back, in gray machine ink, were the last 4 digits of my old hotel incident number. I did not say the number out loud. That was progress, maybe the only kind that mattered there. I brought the strip straight to Denise and set it on the desk without comment. She looked at it once and turned it face down. Then she had me write the digits on the yellow pad instead, the way people rewrite plate numbers or addresses when they do not trust the machine version anymore. I asked if the lower deck had used staff incident numbers before. She said yes, but only after a guard started thinking about the right report instead of the right action. That line made me angry because it was true enough to feel like an accusation. Wrong places always get stronger once they stop needing your fear and start using your professionalism. Out on the floor, a slot bank hit with a burst of fake celebration and applause. The sound carried down the corridor and died near the lower deck hall like it had reached a line in the boat. That regular noise did not cross cleanly. At 2:40 a.m., the lower deck camera showed what looked like a guest collapse near the old center tables. 1 second, the back half of the room was empty. The next, there was a body on the floor beside a chair, one arm out, red chips scattered near the hand. Every instinct from hotel security and casino work lit up at once. Medical, response. Second guard, move, now. Denise saw the same image and stood up so fast her chair rolled into the wall. Then she stopped herself with both hands on the desk. That was the moment I understood how dangerous the lower deck really was. It was not just showing us old guests. It was staging incidents staff are professionally built to rush toward. Denise called surveillance and asked one question only. Was the collapse on any hall camera before the lower deck feed showed it? The answer came back no. No guest had been seen going down. No one had been seen on the lower stairs at all. Denise sat back down slowly and said the worst sentence in the room. She said the deck was trying to get us to treat an image like an incident. That image stayed on the monitor for maybe 12 seconds, long enough to feel irresponsible, long enough to make every part of me that still believed in rapid response feel sick. Then it vanished and left the room empty again, except for one chair tipped at a slightly wrong angle. Denise wrote the time down. and told surveillance not to replay the collapse until daylight. I asked whether someone had ever gone down to answer one of those staged incidents. She said yes. Then she said the part that mattered. Once staff responded downstairs in formal incident mode, radios, medical call, crowd control, report sequence, the lower deck kept more of them than it should have. I asked what kept meant. She said enough that the day shift found doors open, notes started wrong, and cameras contradicted people more than they should. It was one of those answers that tells you the line without fully giving you the damage beyond it. The boat did not need a dead body in the old room. It only needed staff to start behaving as if there was one. At 3:04 a.m., the gray-suited man appeared on camera in the lounge corridor and on the old poker hall monitor at the same time. Same suit, same folded hands, same patient posture, 2 angles too far apart for any normal walk between them. Surveillance called it first, voice level, but faster than before. Denise had them keep both feeds wide. No zoom, no replay. I went to the main floor only because Rule 5 still mattered. If a guest appears on camera, but never on the entry log, do not remove them yourself. Call for a second guard, and keep them in sight until they leave the frame. Reggie met me by the lounge rail, and we watched the nearest angle together. The gray-suited man was standing beside a brass post looking toward the gaming floor. Not lost, not waiting, just present. I took one step to get a clearer line and felt my radio vibrate with a text from surveillance. Lower deck feed now. Showing you 2 on stairs. We were nowhere near the stairs. That message did more to my head than any music so far. I did not need to see the feed to know how that sort of contradiction gets inside a man who already mistrusts official records. For 1 second, I was back in the hotel review room months earlier, watching cameras and statements fail to line up, while everyone higher up acted like one clean version would eventually emerge if they just pressed the right people hard enough. Reggie saw the text on my face before I showed him the screen. He said, "Do not go prove it." That was exactly the right phrase. Not do not panic, not do not move, do not go prove it. The gray-suited man turned his head slightly, as if he had heard us choose the better mistake, and approved of the effort. Then he walked behind a bank of slots and never emerged on the next camera. Surveillance called again and said the lower deck feed was now clear. No stairs, no guards, no one there. The boat was escalating, and it was doing it in my exact native language. Contradictory records. At 3:32 a.m., a floor host ran into the office carrying a blank player card strip and looking more angry than scared, which usually means a thing has already moved past one person's private weirdness and into operations. She said an older woman in a dark green dress kept trying to buy in at a blackjack table with no chips and no printed account, and every time the dealer asked for a player's card, the machine gave back blank stock with the same 4 digits on the reverse. Denise took the strip from her, saw the digits, and looked at me once before turning the paper face down. They were the last 4 from my old incident number again. The host asked if she should have the woman removed. Denise said no, walk her back to the floor, and let her choose where to go. Once the host was gone, Denise told me the boat had stopped testing whether I would rush. Now it was testing whether I would help staff clean it up politely. That was the exact mistake that had ended my last career. And for the first time since I stepped on the riverboat, I knew what the final choice was going to be. Keep the lower deck closed, even if everything in the building started pressuring me to make the night look handled. Once Denise said it that way, the whole shape of the boat changed for me. Up to then, I had still been thinking in terms of sightings, music, camera contradictions, and strange guests. After that, I understood the real danger was procedural. The lower deck did not just want to be seen, it wanted staff to process what they saw in the most polished, professional way possible. Escort the guest, clear the issue, answer the question, move the problem somewhere quieter, write the note so the rest of the floor can keep running. That was exactly what had ruined me at the hotel. Not panic, not violence, courtesy under pressure. A cleaner version in the name of keeping things moving. At 11:58 p.m. the next night, before the first odd thing even happened, Denise put a fresh yellow pad on the desk and wrote one line across the top in block letters. Do not help the boat look normal. That was the clearest rule I had gotten there, and it hit harder than the typed page. The first hours stayed busy enough to remind me why places like that survive so long with bad rooms hidden inside them. Real work keeps institutions alive. Chips lost, drinks dropped, a guest caught trying to use someone else's player card, a dealer break that ran long enough to make a pit boss irritated. I walked the floor, checked the side halls, and kept my radio traffic clean and short. Around 12:47 a.m., the same elderly man in the gray suit appeared at the far end of the lounge corridor and asked a cocktail server what year it was. She laughed nervously because she thought he was joking. That was the wrong instinct in that building. Before she could answer, I stepped in, told her I had him, and walked him toward the quieter hall by the old poker room. He did not resist. He only looked at me with that same patient expression and asked whether the report had been corrected yet. I did not answer. He asked again. I stepped back before speaking, exactly like the rule required, and told him no report was being discussed. He smiled as if that had been a more honest answer than the words themselves. I did not escort him downstairs. That was the temptation now, to solve the odd guest by moving him off the floor and out of other people's sight. The lower deck had started making that option feel responsible. I knew better, so I walked him back toward the center gaming area and stopped beside a bank of slots where there were enough cameras and enough noise to keep the boat from turning the moment into a private hallway problem. He stood beside me a second, then asked whether the manager who leaned on me had kept his job. That landed exactly where it was designed to. Shame is one thing when it lives in your own head. It becomes something uglier when another voice says it out loud in a room full of strangers. I told him he needed to keep moving or leave the floor. He nodded once and turned away without complaint. 5 seconds later, a couple crossed between us, and when they passed, he was gone. No turn toward the bar, no route to the exit, just absence in the middle of a crowded floor. Denise checked the nearby cameras while I stayed off the hall and away from the lower stairs. The gray-suited man appeared on one angle by the lounge rail, then on another near the old poker hall, then nowhere. No entry log matched him. No player's club card, no cashier slip, nothing to explain how he kept getting from question to disappearance without using the normal paths. At 1:14 a.m., the music started below again, piano first this time, then a muted trumpet line so soft it felt like it was rising through old wood instead of speakers. Denise had me call it in on radio just once, then keep my mouth shut. We waited the 2 minutes. A second song came right on schedule. Then, under the music, I heard applause. Not loud, not full room applause. A short, polite run of claps from maybe a dozen hands. The kind people give a lounge singer between songs when they are too tired or too rich to mean it much. Denise shut her eyes once, then told surveillance to keep the lower deck wide and not zoom no matter what it showed. The feed came up dark at first. Then the lower deck room brightened a little, not by turning lights on, but by the camera somehow finding more of the old room than it should have. Tables uncovered now, chairs down, a soft shine on the brass edge of the old service bar. At the back of the room, figures sat in 2s and 3s like a late small crowd waiting on cards or music or both. One woman in a dark green dress stood near a table with one hand resting on the back of a chair. The same green dress the floor host had described the night before. Denise made no move toward the stairs. Neither did I. Then one of the seated figures turned toward the camera, and I saw my old hotel manager's face for one frame before the room went dim again. Not a perfect face, not a miracle, just enough to turn my stomach because the boat had stopped asking around my weak point and started putting it at the table. That was when the pressure came from above, which in hindsight should not have surprised me. One of the overnight casino managers called down and asked why security kept lingering around the old poker corridor when there were guest complaints on the main floor. Denise gave him the short version: camera inconsistency, restricted hall check, no active guest danger. He told her to clear the corridor, keep staff visible, and stop making the floor nervous. I knew that voice, not his specifically, but the type. Polished authority, asking for the cleaner version because the visible version might cost money. Denise hung up and wrote his name on the yellow pad without saying anything. Then she told me that management pressure was part of the boat, too, after a certain hour. Not because managers were in on anything, because the lower deck worked best when staff started getting pushed to make a weird situation look controlled. That fit my old life too well to ignore. Bad institutions do not need ghosts to ruin you. They only need enough people asking for neatness at the wrong time. At 1:52 a.m., the floor host called again and said the woman in the dark green dress was back at the blackjack table with no chips and no readable player card, and a pit boss wanted her removed before she upset a real player. That was the final shape of the trap. A guest who did not fit, a supervisor wanting it handled, a smooth route available if I was willing to take it. Denise sent me and Reggie together because Rule 5 still mattered. Second guard, keep them in sight. Do not remove them alone. We found the woman standing exactly where the host said, one hand on the rail, expression calm enough to be unsettling. Up close, she looked neither dead nor theatrical. She looked like a guest whose night had already lasted too long. The pit boss asked quietly if we could just take her downstairs and sort it out off the floor. Denise had been right. The boat was no longer only in the lower deck. It had moved up into everyone's idea of how to tidy a problem. I told the pit boss no, not sharply, just clearly enough that there would be no clean misunderstanding later. Then I addressed the woman and asked if she wanted to keep playing or step away from the table area. She looked at me with a kind of tired sympathy and asked whether I had finally learned not to fix another man's story for him. That nearly got me. Not because it was supernatural, but because it was the exact shape of private shame made public in a bright room. I kept my face still and told her she could choose any direction on the main floor except the lower hall. She smiled faintly and turned toward the lounge. Reggie and I followed at a distance, just close enough to keep her in frame. She passed one camera, then another. On the third, the image held the corridor empty while she was still physically in front of us. Reggie muttered that the feed had dropped her before the floor did. We kept following. When she reached the mirrored wall outside the lounge, She was simply no longer there. We did not chase. That was the whole point now. Do not help the boat by treating its disappearances like active incidents that need elegant closure. We went back to the office and wrote exactly what happened on the yellow pad. Not in the formal incident binder, because Denise said the boat got stronger when staff tried to move strange guests into the ordinary report stream too early. While we were writing, surveillance texted down that the lower deck feed was active again. No music this time, no staged collapse, just a room full enough to feel open for business. Tables occupied, 2 dealers standing, and at the center blackjack table, a man in my old hotel manager's suit jacket leaning over the felt as if explaining something quietly to someone seated out of frame. Denise did not let me stare. She shut the monitor down and said the lower deck was trying to give me the one thing men like me always think they want: another chance to handle the room correctly. Then she added the line that mattered: a bad floor loves a second report. At 2:31 a.m., the lower deck door alarm gave one soft chirp and then went silent. The access indicator by the corridor changed from locked to unsecured for maybe 3 seconds before the light settled again. Denise and I were already in the office, and we both saw it on the hall monitor at the same moment. Neither of us moved. That was the climax starting, not with a scream or a bang, but with the exact sort of small access problem security staff are trained to resolve without making anyone else think about it. The radio crackled with the overnight manager, asking whether we had a lower hall issue and whether he needed to send engineering. Denise keyed back and said no active guest hazard, corridor under observation, no response requested. That was the opposite of every bad instinct in the profession. It was also the only right move left. The lower deck was trying to become a normal maintenance problem with guest exposure. If we walked down there to make it neat, we would be doing exactly what had ruined me before, helping something ugly become presentable. The next half hour moved like the longest quiet argument of my life. The lower deck stayed unsecured on the hall monitor often enough to draw the eye, and not long enough to justify a normal response. Music came and went under the floor, never forming a full tune for more than a few seconds. Twice the applause returned. Once I heard what sounded like a dealer call the end of a hand in the low-clipped tone table men use when they want players moving instead of thinking. Management called again, asking why the lower hall was still being watched. Denise gave the same answer: corridor, under observation, no active guest hazard. That sentence had become our whole defense. Do not transform weird activity into a tidy operational incident the boat can use. At 2:58 a.m., surveillance texted that the lower deck feed now showed me standing at the center table with a report folder in my hand. I was in the office with Denise and Reggie when the message came through. That should have scared me more than it did. By then, seeing a false clean version had started feeling too familiar. That false image on the lower deck monitor settled something in me. Not because it was less creepy than the rest, because it was the exact thing my life had already taught me how to hate. A polished record of something that had not happened, arranged neatly enough to become useful if nobody resisted it. I asked Denise whether the lower deck ever cleared on its own, if staff refused every route it offered. She said yes, but only when the room stopped getting fed by corrections. No escorts downstairs, no fast answers, no synchronized witnessing, no incident response, no cleaner report. The whole rule set boiled down to that. The boat could stage guests, music, cameras, and half-open doors, but it still needed staff. to do the elegant institutional thing and make it all manageable. That was what I had done at the hotel. That was what the lower deck wanted me to repeat in a prettier suit. Once I understood that, the shame it had been using on me lost some of its grip, not because I forgave myself, because I stopped thinking another clean handling would save anyone. At 3:16 a.m., the gray-suited man appeared one last time, this time not on a monitor first, but in the doorway of the lower hall itself. He stood just outside the unsecured door light with both hands folded and looked exactly as patient as the first night. He asked what year it was. I waited. He asked again. I stepped back before answering, then gave him the year in a flat voice with no invitation in it. He nodded once and asked who signed the final version. That question had more force than the others, because by then the whole night had turned on exactly that kind of language. Final version. Clean copy. Approved report. I told him no one was discussing that there. He smiled in a way that almost looked disappointed, then asked if the woman in green had been handled, not helped, not escorted, handled. The hotel all over again in one soft, ugly word. I said nothing this time. He stood there another second, then stepped backward into the dark lower hall without ever turning his shoulders, and the unsecured door light went red again. A minute later, the lower deck cameras came fully alive. No flicker now, no half room. The whole floor lit in black and white like a late open gaming room from another decade. Tables active, dealer hands moving, guests seated in clusters. The woman in green at one table, the red jacket woman at another, the cream sport coat man from the blank player's card by the bar rail, and at the center table, a man in my old hotel manager's jacket with a folder open in front of him, as if the lower deck had decided to stop hinting and just present the room it wanted me to enter. The overnight manager called again, voice tighter now, asking whether security was going downstairs or if he needed to bring someone from surveillance. Denise said no one was going below. He asked if she understood she was refusing a management instruction. She said yes, and wrote his name down a second time. That was the most honest act in the room, not because she was brave, because she refused to make his pressure part of the lower deck's route. The applause started again at 3:24 a.m., louder this time, and for one moment it sounded like it was coming from both below and through the ceiling speakers above us, as if the boat wanted the whole main floor to drift one step closer to agreement. Guests on the gaming floor did not react. Dealers kept dealing. Cocktail staff kept moving. That bothered me more than if everyone had gone silent. Whatever the lower deck was, it did not need the whole building to notice it. It only needed the right staff, in the right hallway, with the right instincts. I stood in the office doorway, looking toward the lower corridor, and felt the old reflex rise one last time. Go down, see it yourself, end the uncertainty, write the correct version. I knew where that road ended, because I had already lived it in another building, under different lights, so I stayed where I was. Denise stayed too. Reggie shut the lower hall monitor off entirely. We let the room below keep offering itself without giving it the witness it wanted. At 3:39 a.m., the music stopped all at once. No fade, no final chord, just absence. The applause died with it. Then, one by one, the lower deck camera feeds lost their occupied room. First, the red jacket woman vanished from her chair. Then the woman in green was gone from the side table. Then the center table held only cards, chips, and the open folder. Then those two were gone. What remained was the same closed lower room I had seen on my first night. Covered tables, stacked chairs, dark service bar. No guests, no movement. Denise did not celebrate. She only wrote the time on the yellow pad and told surveillance to leave the feeds off until daylight. The unsecured door indicator stayed red. The hall stayed quiet. The overnight manager called one last time, asking if the issue had cleared. Denise said yes, and left it at that. No explanation, no polished account. That felt better than any full report could have. For once, something ugly was not going to get the neat version from me. The rest of the shift went by with the strange thin calm that follows a night when the worst thing has already decided not to get fed anymore. The gaming floor stayed normal. A little too normal, maybe, but I was done treating smooth surfaces as proof of anything. Around 5 a.m., the breakfast crowd started replacing the graveyard crowd, which in casinos always feels like one kind of denial handing the room off to another. Denise locked the yellow pad in the bottom drawer and told me there would be no formal lower hall incident entered unless someone from day shift asked specifically. I asked whether that was not just another cleaner version. She said no. Clean versions are lies that make institutions safe. Silence about the lower deck was refusal to root something forward. That distinction mattered more than I wanted it to. Before I left, she asked if I planned to stay on the boat. I told her no. The answer came easy. That surprised me. Shame had kept me in bad jobs before. It was not keeping me there. I drove out after sunrise, with river fog lifting low off the water, and the boat looking smaller in daylight than it ever had at night. That is another thing old buildings do well. They make their worst hours look unreasonable once morning hits them. The parking lot was just a parking lot again. The brass trim looked cheap instead of rich. The covered entry looked more like a hospitality set piece than a threshold. None of that changed what the lower deck had been. I knew better by then than to expect daylight to correct a place. What had changed was smaller and more useful. I no longer believed my job was to make a bad institution easier to defend just because I knew how to write a calm report. That sounds obvious when you say it plain. It took me a humiliating amount of life to learn. I texted my ex from the parking lot and told her I had picked up other work and would make my next custody weekend on time. It was not redemption. It was just one rote I was no longer going to let get rewritten for me. For the next few weeks, I stayed off security floors entirely. Day labor, stock work, one short run helping a friend with event setup in Baton Rouge, where the biggest problem was a truck arriving late and nobody pretending it had arrived early. I slept better than I had in months, which should have warned me. Places like that do not always follow you in obvious ways. They only need your habits if they are going to keep using you, and by then I had stopped offering the best ones. Still, the lower deck had taught me a form of caution I could not unlearn. I no longer answered old questions too fast. I no longer helped polished people make ugly situations sound cleaner than they were. And when a corridor, a stairwell, or a service door started offering me a version of a problem that looked too tidy to be true, I stopped treating curiosity like professionalism. One evening, in a hotel in Mobile, walking past a locked service stair after midnight, I heard slow trumpet music rising from below. Old style, lounge soft, no speakers nearby. I stopped in that hallway with the hotel ice machine humming behind me and the carpet damp with coastal air, and listened hard enough to make sure I was not borrowing the sound from memory. It was there. Trumpet, then piano under it, low and patient. Exactly the kind of tune the lower deck used to float up when it wanted staff to come see what had already been arranged. I looked at the stairwell door. Locked. No guest access sign. Narrow strip of light under the threshold that should not have been there at all. For 1 second, the old reflex rose in me again. Check it. Confirm it. Make sure it is not a real problem someone else will later accuse you of ignoring. Then I remembered the best rule that boat ever taught me, the one it never actually wrote down. Some rooms only get stronger when the wrong man tries to handle them well. I walked away without touching the door. The music played another few seconds, then stopped before I reached the elevator. I did not go back to check if there was a second song.